A very good evening. You're watching India Global. I'm Gauri Dwivedi. As always, we start the show with the top stories that we will be doing a deep dive on. First up, India gears up to send a delegation to 52 countries following Operation Sindoor as Pakistan turns to its all-weather friend China. Even as we decode whether Operation Sindoor has become the catalyst for India's burgeoning military-industrial complex. India-US bilateral trade pact gains momentum. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal holds talks with his US counterpart. COVID-19 seems to be on the rise yet again. Sudden spike in cases reported across several cities in Asia. India reports over 250 mild cases with no severity. Indian PhD student facing deportation wins an important legal battle. Priya Saxena wins a legal reprieve to remain in the US. And breakthroughs in the Russia-Ukraine war after Donald Trump spoke with Vladimir Putin. What happens next? We decode the peace treaty. How soon will it happen? Even as only tentative steps have been taken towards peace. Viewers, this show is happening at a time when there are three very important developments that are taking place. One, India is getting ready to send an all-party delegation to 52 countries to isolate Pakistan globally. Second, Pakistan has done what it does best, run out of options and go to its all-weather friend or best buddy China. And three, India is now at the cusp of a growing indigenous defense sector. In fact, has Operation Sindoor become an inflection point, a catalyst for the start of a deep, large industrial military complex in India? We decode that right here on India Global, and there's reason to believe just that. Why is it? First of all, it comes at a time when India's indigenous military system has been the real stars as far as Operation Sindoor is concerned. The reason why India trumped Pakistan so decisively was to a large extent due to its homegrown defense systems. Whether you take the drones, whether you take the air defense systems or the electronic warfare, or Indian prowess, all of it was on full display. And of course, the Pakistanis had Chinese defense equipment, which brings me to my second argument, which is that when you have these Chinese equipments, what really can happen or what all can go wrong. The Chinese defense export industry is worth $3.2 billion as per some statistics. Their recent performance will make many countries wary. Instead, some of the market could even gravitate towards India. In fact, China's defense exports have also witnessed a gradual but a very consistent decline, from 6.2% in 2015 to 2019 to about 5.9% in 22 to 24, and further to 5.8%. As per the latest SIPRI data, that is the Stockholm data that has come in, Chinese companies actually fare worse than their counterparts, whether it's in France or Russia or Britain or Germany or even South Korea. And in terms of order pipeline, they fare worse than most other countries. And this is even before Operation Sindoor showed just how substandard some of the Chinese equipment is. Well, viewers, nothing speaks like battlefield failure, doesn't it? And while there will be no takers, I would like to believe that there will be no takers for Chinese defense equipment that's unreliable in conflict, as Operation Sindoor just pointed out. And the third thing, there is the government push, a concerted policy push in India towards more focus on indigenous defense manufacturing, more acquisition, whether it's clearing of the 54,000 crore rupees of defense purchases or the additional emergency procurement to the tune of 40,000 crore rupees, all of it going to boost the Indian manufacturing. It could be public or it could be the private sector, burgeoning, growing and looking to respond to India's growing needs. Operation Sindoor achieved many firsts. Putting India's homegrown military tech for the world to see was just one among those big achievements. Turning attention now to the other important story that we are decoding, which is a possible breakthrough that could have been or seems to be on the horizon when it comes to the India-US trade pact. There's a critical push for economic diplomacy. India's Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal is in fact in Washington to fast-track the first phase of a long-anticipated trade pact with America. A breakthrough could be on the horizon. Which way would it go is something that remains to be seen. Which are those sectors where it will be most visible remains to be seen. Because at the end of the day, what we are looking at is a three-phase sort of a pact. In one first phase, it could be a very small, specific sectors that could be agreed upon. Vast sectors may be in the second phase, about 19 or 20 of them. And then it could be the third and the full-fledged trade pact that could be in place no sooner than maybe next year. But some thorny issues remain. Primary of that, of course, is the non-tariff barriers that Indian goods are subjected to when they go to America. What are these non-tariff barriers? Essentially, quality checks. Any good can be stopped by any country the moment you say it doesn't meet a quality check, doesn't it? And that is the big non-tariff barrier that most Indian goods are subjected to when they are in America. How do we get past that? Will those issues be addressed? Will that mean that India-US relationship will probably go to the next level after this trade pact is signed? Are some of the questions that we're going to try and put forth, and let's put that out, some of those big questions before we get in our guests to decode some of that. Prateek and Ajay Bagga will join us, but first I want to put out those big questions in terms of what all are we looking to really get past as far as the trade pact is concerned. Will agriculture be a part of the phase deal? Remember, that's the most important aspect, because agriculture at the end of the day is one of the key issues on which India wants protection for. The next question, which is, in Trump 2.0, are tariffs essentially driving diplomacy? Is everything being seen through the prism of tariffs? Third, will early wins essentially lead to long-term trust? Remember, there are cases that have been filed. India has actually filed case in the WTO, which brings me to the last question. What happens to those cases, the retaliatory tariffs that have been imposed by India? Will all of them be put aside? Will those trust issues, those dispute issues also be resolved is the other key question that we are hoping, hopefully, to get answers to. Prateek Dattani and Ajay Bagga joins me to decode this. Prateek joins us from London. He's the MD of EPG, Economic and Strategic Consulting, and Ajay Bagga is a veteran market expert. In fact, Prateek, let me start with you. It's a three-phased trade deal that's been in the works for some time. In fact, J.D. Vance announced the terms of reference when he was in India last month. It's been about a month since he announced that. And enough back and forth has gone. How hopeful are you that a pact would be announced in its entirety? And the second part I want to ask you is, how limited do you expect the first phase to be? Because I suspect these negotiations will probably go on for some time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gauri. I think the first thing to remember is it's actually really unusual for the US side to admit to the fact that this will be a protracted set of trade negotiations, that it will be over three phases. The last phase will need congressional approval in more than a year's time in the US. And if there are some very competitive House races, particularly on the Republican side, then maybe that won't even get signed off in the House of Representatives. So this is very much a long-term thing. Trump announced his tariff pause on the 9th of April until the 31st of July. He said 150 countries have got in touch with him to negotiate trade deals. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said actually they're only focusing on the 18 most important trading partners. India is the 10th most important for the US. So I think there's a will on both sides. Piyush Goyal is a seasoned hand at these kind of trade negotiations. He's just finished negotiating a trade deal with the UK after 3 years of intense negotiations. I dare say that the Indian side is more experienced in this than the current US administration is, because most of the US guys have come in from the private sector rather than having a big background in government. I would expect whatever we announce now to be very limited in scope. Things like phytosanitary standards, you can't announce quickly. These are very detailed regulatory changes that require agreement across an entire supply chain. So I think those will come much later. I think the benefit for the Indian economy is probably going to be quite limited. The absence of a deal will hurt India for sure. the presence of it, I don't think will benefit India much, at least in whatever we expect in the first round.
Ajay, I want to ask you this question as well, which is that the market, of course, and a lot of investors have been waiting for some sort of a big breakthrough sort of an announcement. The sense one gets is we are still some time away from that big bang announcement, probably a roadmap at best. But I want to understand from you, where do you think this give and take will lie? Because India also has its concerns, whether it's the agriculture, the larger dairy market, and so on and so forth. Where do you see this give and take actually lie? And how limited do you think the first phase of these negotiations could be?
Yeah, Gauri, it could be, as Pratik mentioned also, I think it could be a very limited first phase where zero tariff kind of goods are both ways. There is a handshake on those, and there is some reduction by India on some key areas that the US wants. Farm, I think, is a no-go area because of domestic political compulsion. So even Japan doesn't open its farm sector. So uh, those farm exports which are already coming in, like the nuts from California, all those things will continue. But overall, broad brush, opening it to US wheat or US soya or US corn, that won't happen. So I think it will be a limited deal. Again, there will be a lot of talk of mutual bonhomie and strategic relationships, but we'll have to cut through and see 10% minimum. I think that Trump has made very clear that there are 10% universal tariffs. So we are not going back to the 2-3% days. 10% will be the minimum. And then product by product, what India will be trying, especially the very labor intensive exports of ours, like textiles, like gems, jewelry, leather exports, electronics, how do those get
And you're
treated? If
mentioning
we can,
sectors, but I want to now, in fact, go up, talk 30,000 feet here, which is that there are also trust concerns on both sides. The fact that India took US to WTO, the fact that US imposed tariffs for steel and aluminium, that also means that while negotiations may be happening on one corner of this entire trade arrangement, the day-to-day discussions still revolve around protecting domestic industry, and that could be counterintuitive if you're really trying to have a broad trade pact, isn't it, Pratik?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, looking back several decades, the way the Japanese economy grew to what it is today is through protectionism. With the support from the US, the way the Korean economy grew is through protectionism. And India is at a different phase of economic development from the US. So it's all very well for Trump to say, remove all tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. But that's because per capita income may be tens of thousands of dollars in the US and it's $2,500 in India. So India actually, for very sound economic reasons, needs some of those barriers in place. And you're right, there's these trust issues, but I think ultimately Trump is a deal maker and Piyush Goyal is extremely seasoned in this. I think if there's a deal to be had, these other WTO issues will fall by the wayside.
Final question I want to ask you is, which is that while trade discussions are important, protecting domestic industry is equally important. What is the kind of upside that we're looking at? Because we sort of get so bogged down by the give and take, we forget the upside. What's the upside that we are talking about here if this trade pact goes through sooner than we expect?
Sure. So the US is India's most valued trading partner, $40 billion plus in trade. So for India to be able to increase its exports is really, really important. The baseline for tariffs, as Ajay also said, is going to be 10%. So for export-oriented industries from India, where they're labor-intensive and margins are really low, that 10% will still make a big difference as to whether those companies still want to export to the US to the same extent. For final goods and intermediate goods where labor intensity is much lower and profit margins are much higher,
Yes.
that's where I think India stands to gain the most. And I think that's where India also wants to move towards as well. So agriculture is a no-go, absolutely, like Ajay said, but where
Yes.
there's more IP, there's more know-how, that's where India wants to move its economy as well.
Indeed. We leave it there. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on India Global. And as we await the final announcement, well, bottom line, viewers, is that tariff is a lever that Donald Trump uses all too often. But let's be clear, the trade deal is as much of interest to the US as it is for India, simply because India offers a large market. There are also geopolitical concerns and tensions, ensuring that all of American trading and business interests should not be locked into China, but they want alternate supply chains. India provides that. So as negotiations continue, there are also several unanswered questions. While the upside is there, but there are several unanswered questions. How will the two sides unwind the additional duties that they have slapped? Specific sectors which are very sensitive on the two sides. Steel and aluminium for the US, agriculture for India. How do those concerns get addressed? And for India, remember, the dispute to the WTO that has been escalated to the level of the WTO also needs to be wound down. Then there are instances when Donald Trump has made comments that don't add up. Comment around India's zero tariffs offer add to the frustration of trade negotiators on both sides. And last and most important question, will this actually lead to a more evolved US-India relationship? What will that be? The shape of that, the contours of that? Will that mean greater collaboration on technology front, space front, intelligence front, geopolitical alignment? All of that would probably be known once the trade issue is sorted out, and sooner rather than later. All right, viewers, on that note, we slip into a short break. We come back on the other side with the COVID-19's spike, what it means in India and around Asia. We come back and decode. Well, viewers, COVID-19 has once again made a resurgence. Believe it or not, 5 years since we started talking about COVID, there has been lockdowns. Well, we are talking about it all over again. Unfortunately, cases have spiked in Asia and so in India as well. 164 new cases have been reported since 12th of May, with Kerala reporting the highest at 69. And Singapore, Hong Kong are experiencing fresh waves, while in India, symptoms remain mild. There's no cause for alarm. But what is it that we should be bracing ourselves for? What has been the learnings from COVID that we need to keep in mind and ensure that going forward, in terms of our public health responses, India is better prepared? To talk on that, I want to quickly now get in Dr. Arjun Dang, who is the CEO of Dr. Dang's lab, to understand from him what is it that we should be looking at. Dr. Dang, explain to us that when you talk about this COVID spike that has come in parts of Asia, including in India, what is it that we should be looking at and be prepared for?
Thank you, Gauri. Unfortunately, it does feel like deja vu, like you said 5 years back. But the only difference I would say is that we are a lot more wiser today. Today, we are, of course, better prepared to handle the situation in case it escalates to that extent. And the cases also that we've seen rise in Southeast Asia have been mostly attributed to JN1, that is a sub-lineage of the Omicron variant of the COVID-19 virus. That is also known as Pirola, and it is the BA2.86 variant. Now, what we must be careful of is that the virus has mutated. It has certain spike proteins using which it mutates and gets stronger and also more transmissible. Luckily and fortunately, the couple of hundred cases that we have in India right now have not been severe and have been easily managed. But of course, moving forward, I think it is time to be extremely watchful and vigilant. I think from a public perspective, what all of us practiced last time was precision public health measures, and we have to do the absolute same. From a central or a government or a state government perspective, I think preparedness is key. I think the recent meeting also that the government had, there was a lot of talk about being prepared, not only from a healthcare infrastructure perspective, but also more importantly from a surveillance perspective, so that we can know exactly what is happening with our ear very close to the ground and take actions at the right time. and obviously have guidelines to guide the broad public as well.
Okay, so just an update. Mumbai's 2 COVID-linked deaths have been attributed to comorbidities, not the virus itself. So, Dr. Dang, we're going to speak again. Hopefully, we will only continue to speak about mild symptoms and India's preparedness, not anything untoward. But with COVID, unfortunately, it brings horrific memories. Viewers, in fact, on that note, I'm going to shift focus and get you an exclusive conversation that my colleague Vasudha Venugopal had with Jay Panda, one of the 7 leaders who will be leading one of the delegations to the 52 countries that India will hold dialogue with after Operation Sindoor. Effort and motive is clear: to isolate Pakistan. How will we do that? Jay Panda tells you in this exclusive report. Listen in.
Mr. Panda, how do you see the significance of this diplomatic exercise, specifically with regard to Saudi Arabia? Because this is the part of the world that the Prime Minister's worked really hard on to increase our outreach. It's an important country when it comes to bilateral relations, trade, and also their influence on geopolitics and Islamic nations. How do you signify the importance of this outreach?
This is a very important part of an ongoing reset. You know, we've been suffering from cross-border terrorism sponsored by Pakistan for now nearly 80 years. The world is against terrorism, and everybody knows that Pakistan is the epicenter of terror. I mean, it's not just India. If you look at 9/11, if you look at attacks in UK and other places, they all know that. But the fact is that while we are continually facing the brunt of these perfidies by Pakistan, other nations may not have that level of bandwidth because, you know, they have other issues going on. There's a war in Europe. There's a war in Middle East. There is a trade reset that's happening all over the world. Now, what has happened is this new normal that has been defined by the Modi government has a military component to it. And now Pakistan, especially its army, has been made to pay a very costly price. There is a reset in the perspective of how people look at it. So, for example, Pakistan's nuclear blackmail. In a series of events, starting from the surgical strikes, then with Balakot airstrike, and now this time, the Modi government has redefined and has made it very clear that, you know, there is a very big distance between retaliating and going anywhere near the nuclear threshold, and Pakistan must be made to pay that price. So that has been reset. But modern conflicts are not just about the battlefield. It's also about the narrative. And so while the Prime Minister himself has done a phenomenal job for more than a decade, he has tirelessly slogged, gone to dozens of countries, built rapport with the top leadership of all the major countries. This needs to be now taken forward further. Right. And so these delegations that are going out, are multi-party. And also we have not just politicians, but all domain experts, like in the team that I'm going on. There is, there are very senior leaders like Ghulam Nabi Azad, there's Nishikant Dubey, there's Asaduddin Owaisi.
All right, on that note, I'm going to slip into a short break. Come back on the other side. Talk more about Priya Saxena, the Indian PhD student who's got a big reprieve after the Trump administration wanted to send her back for a petty traffic offense. We come back and talk more on that. A young scientist caught in the crosshairs of a sweeping immigration crackdown. Well, Priya Saxena, an Indian PhD student in South Dakota, was nearly deported over a traffic ticket. Well, in April, the Department of Homeland Security cancelled her valid student visa, citing a criminal record for failing to stop an emergency vehicle in 2021, a citation she paid in full. Without warning, her service record was deleted, jeopardizing her graduation as well as her legal status. But Saxena fought back. She sued the Trump administration, winning a legal reprieve just in time. And last weekend, she walked across the stage, earning her doctorate in chemical and biological engineering. And this week, a federal judge blocked DHS from arresting or detaining her, slamming the government instead. The case, viewers, shines a light on a troubling trend. The Trump administration has revoked thousands of student visas, citing most minor of the infractions. And Priya Saxena's story is just one in a sea of legal residents that have been swept up by a hardline immigration agenda. Now, what does this mean? Is this some sort of a benchmark that has been set, a precedent as to how some of the other Indian students can now take on some of these illogical decisions by Trump 2.0. To talk on that, Irina Zuckerman joins me, who's an international immigration and national security lawyer. Irina, I want to ask you this question, that how Priya Saxena has been able to win against and find that legal reprieve against an absolutely unfair decision by the DHS. Is that now a precedent that other students can also now hope to get a legal reprieve from?
Thank you. Absolutely. Basically, what the court found is that her detention, the attempt to deport her was completely illegal. Traffic infractions are not subject to deportations. They are not the sort of offenses that you can just be thrown out of the United States from. And certainly it's not a sort of national security threat that should prevent a committed student from graduating and completing her degree, especially after all the money spent. And this is a completely correct call by the court. And I think others in that situation would certainly look to this recourse. There's no reason why any other court would find anything different under similar circumstances. So any student who is being pressured into self-deportation or deported for mere traffic infractions or
Irina,
other...
I'll come in there. I want you to first of all, try and see if you can fix your audio a little bit. But as you do that, I want to also bring to your notice the fact that thousands of students had their service record being scrubbed and were asked to essentially either self-deport or go back at the earliest. Do you think with this case acting as a precedent, the government will stop doing that? Because these are all legal residents, immigrants, aren't they? They're legal immigrants on student visas, valid visas. Do you think the Trump administration will stop doing that because now there's a precedent, a legal precedent? Irina, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
The question, okay, it's. I guess that's pretty much what it is for the Trump administration as well, right? They can't hear these verdicts and some of these legal residents, immigrants that are there. And the question I was asking was, will the government now stop scrubbing service records of students on valid student visas?
Don't think so. I think that they're trying very hard to see what sticks. The fact that this particular student chose to challenge the administration is a setback for them, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to start to continue this against on the chance that other students will be too afraid to challenge the administration or will not have the means to take the matter to court. Some of these litigation matters could be pricey, and depending on the student situation, it could be a financial challenge as well.
Let's leave it there, Irina. Thanks much for joining me from Washington, D.C. Hopefully, we'll be able to get that audio line better next time around. Shifting focus now to the other big story that we are tracking, which is the Russia-Ukraine war. 1,100 days, the war continues, but is there some sort of a peace breakthrough? That's exactly what we are talking. A war-weary world watches as the ground beneath Ukraine shifts once again. President Zelensky finds himself increasingly on the margins. There's been a 2-hour call that's taken place between Putin and Trump, and peace talks have been declared between Russia and Ukraine that will start immediately. But what he didn't say speaks volumes. The fact that Zelensky was, of course, not on the table. Listen in what Donald Trump said.
Of course I did. I talked to him about it. I said, when are we going to end this, Vladimir? I know him for a long time now. I said, when are we going to end this bloodshed, this bloodbath? It's a bloodbath. And I do believe he wants to end it.
Despite Donald Trump's bold promises of a ceasefire and the Vatican offering to, in fact, host these talks, Russia still demands more than just peace. In fact, it's hinting at some sort of territorial concessions and quote-unquote root causes as far as what the war has been all about. Well, as far as Zelensky is concerned, he's demanding that there should be some sort of a trust from Kremlin and ensure that it lasts. I want to play out what Zelensky said, and then we come back and decode this in detail.
Якщо Росія ставить умови виводити наші війська з нашої ж землі, значить вони не хочуть, щоб було припинення вогню і не хочуть, щоб війна закінчилась. Тому що вони чітко розуміють, що Україна не буде цього робити.
All right, you heard the two sides, well, not the two sides, but two out of those three sides, and that's exactly what we are asking, which is when will peace come, and most importantly, who gets to define it? As I said, there are three players, but only two seem to be speaking at any point of time. Let's put out those big questions that we will be asking on the show this evening. First up, will there be any ceasefire before the next round of talks take place? That's the first question. One side wants it, the other side doesn't. Next, what will be the new US-Russia relationship under Trump 2.0? Will, at the moment peace talks make any progress, will there be a completely different relationship between Washington and Moscow? And is that the reason why these talks are being hurried and sort of, get past? That's another question we'll ask. Will peace talks in Rome actually lead to any settlement? When they will happen? What will they lead to? All those are questions that are still in the air, right? And lastly, will US's NATO allies have any say whatsoever in the peace talks? As I said, there are multiple stakeholders in this, but there is only Donald Trump and Putin in the equation. Harsh Pant of the ORF and Sophie Fullerton, who's joining me from New York on this story. It has many dimensions, but it is increasingly becoming about two stakeholders, isn't it, Professor Pant?
Yes, I think particularly the way, Mr. Trump, the way he's playing it, it seems that he's more interested in getting Mr. Putin on board into some sort of an agreement. And I think in some ways it's very personal now for Trump. He had made bold claims early on in his campaign, early in his term, 24 hours, I'll resolve this, and all of that. And clearly he looks at it and he might be looking at it from a very personal point of view, that nothing seems to be moving, that his demands, particularly on Putin, are not working. And largely what he had, initially the way he had framed it as a big geopolitical rapprochement between US and Russia, leading to some sort of a deal on Ukraine, that seems at the moment out of his reach, because I think the two protagonists in this conflict have largely different ideas as to where the battlefield realities are and how they want to shape them. So I do think, I think largely for Trump, this would be an exercise now in pushing Putin into accepting some kind of an engagement with Ukraine. But I think increasingly battlefield realities would be the deciding factor, and at the moment Russia feels it has the momentum.
All right. Sophie, there seem to be as many questions as we did before that phone call actually took place, except for the fact that two out of those three stakeholders seem to be on the same page that peace is needed. When that will happen, how that will happen, who all will be part of those peace talks, none of that is clear. Even the fact that timeline, while those conversations may have been very fruitful and positive, there is no word as far as timeline is concerned. So the question is, Sophie, some would say that Putin seems to be getting very good end of this engagement, and the raw end of the stick may be going to the other stakeholders.
I would agree. I would say that Putin does want to end this war, but he wants to end it on his own terms, meaning that removal of Russia in specific areas or Ukraine moving more towards the West. He's not going to end it until Putin gets what Putin wants. I see that Trump and Putin continue to have a good working and personal relationship. We saw even in these 2-hour phone calls that Putin asked about Trump's children. So it shows more of this personal relationship that Putin wants to continue even if this war ends, because he sees that US-Russian relations could really move more towards his favor in the future. And that's what Russia wants, for legitimacy on the world stage and for their own domestic and foreign policy advancements that they feel like they can't win without some type of US legitimacy.
Mm-hmm. Professor Pant, which brings me to ask you this, that it almost looks like this peace formula is a stumbling block before a larger, expansive US-Russia relationship takes over. And that will be primarily on trade, on business, on aligned economic opportunities. Is that the sense you get?
Yes, I think for both sides, it seems that they would quickly come to bilateral engagement rather than talk about this nasty business of Ukraine. But unfortunately, that's the reality both of them face. But Trump had talked about Ukraine being this issue being resolved very quickly. He has been unable to do it. Putin would also like to move quickly to the table with the Americans sitting side by side, discussing global politics, making himself a global leader, appearing to be a global leader. So I think for him also, it's a question of resolving this conflict. But again, I think, as was mentioned earlier, he would like to be on his terms because clearly he has a domestic audience to showcase that some kind of victory is achieved. I mean, the reality is that Russians are losing their lives in record numbers. The reality is that Russian economy is faltering. The long-term challenges are huge. But for someone like Putin, that's not important. A victory on the battlefield, perceived though it be, that would be an important marker. So I think bilaterally he would want to sit with Trump as quickly as possible, but Ukraine keeps on coming in between.
Indeed. In fact, what the Trump tweet that came out, the message on his Truth Social platform very clearly said Russia wants to do large-scale trade with the US when this catastrophic bloodbath is over, and I agree. There is tremendous opportunity for Russia to create massive amounts of jobs and wealth. Its potential is unlimited. So at the end of the day, it's trade, 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 trade. That's essentially how Trump 2.0 views all relationships in the world, which brings me to also ask at the same time, Sophie, the fact that how soon do you see this actually now taking place? While no timeline has been announced, but the fact that both leaders seem to be on the same page, they've come out with these grandstanding in terms of the announcements. How soon do you think a possible peace arrangement framework could be thrashed out?
I do believe that the Trump administration is getting quite frustrated with Putin, even if it's silently. As was mentioned, there was this idea or argument on the Trump side that Trump would be able to get this finished in 24 hours. And he hasn't been able to have the specific type of foreign policy wins that he needs to bring back to his own domestic base. So I would argue that Putin does want to see some type of movement more towards what Trump wants. And what Trump wants is more of peace within this. But then I would also argue that we're not going to see any type of movement, and we'll continue to see this type of stalemate until Putin gets what Putin wants. I do think it's also very interesting that Trump is now backtracking in what he said in relation to meeting with Putin one-on-one. We saw that he said he wanted to meet with Putin, but now he's saying more the Vatican can be that third party, that can be that bridge that Trump is saying possibly he doesn't possibly want to be involved in. So we are seeing a shift, and as was mentioned previously, Putin wants to have this relationship with Trump beyond Ukraine. There's a lot of interest in relation to what Russia sees foreign policy-wise with US-Russia relations.
Speaking of foreign policy, while Donald Trump just wrapped up his visit to the Middle East, Mr. Putin is set to have an Arab summit he will have in the next couple of months, essentially indicating that Russia is an important player as far as geopolitics is concerned, and it will remain so. And Mr. Putin is right now not willing to give up all cards. And in fact, bottom line, viewers, as far as this issue is concerned, is that the war is still on. Yes, peace looks like possibly on the anvil, but that's just what it is, a possibility, not a reality. Why? Well, no timeline has been mentioned. When the talks will start? Will there be a ceasefire during those talks? And most importantly, will Zelensky and the entire or most of the EU leaders be in the picture or have any role to play whatsoever? The war is being seen as a stumbling block to a larger US-Russia relationship with trade as its fulcrum. And to get to that, a ceasefire, a peace negotiation needs to be finalized. And I think that's the only thing that's driving Donald Trump here. But as far as Mr. Putin is concerned, what's driving him is greater military victory to have more leverage on the table. Who has the cards is really the million-dollar question. All right, on that note, we slip into a quick break. We come back on the other side on some of the other big stories that are making news. It's time to get you the quick takes on the show. First up, Trump administration has struck again, cutting another $60 million in federal grants to Harvard University. The reason? What officials call a failure to address anti-Semitism. But critics say it's about something much bigger, which is power, politics, and the future of academic freedom. The Department of Health and Human Services confirmed the funding termination today, citing what it called discrimination on the campus. In fact, this brings the total frozen funds to over $2.2 billion. President Trump has accused Harvard of tolerating hate in the name of protest after pro-Palestinian demonstrations rocked campuses nationwide. But students insist they are speaking out against war, not religion. Meanwhile, Education Secretary has said that she's made a mockery of higher education and should rely on its own endowment, not taxpayers. Harvard is now suing the administration, calling this a direct assault on the First Amendment. But as billions hang in the balance, one of America's oldest institutions finds itself at war, not just over money, but over meaning. Quick take number 2. Tensions in West Asia are flaring once again as Iran has delivered a resounding no to US demands. The Islamic Republic says it will stop enriching uranium no matter what Washington says. Iranian Foreign Minister has declared that uranium enrichment is a sovereign right protected under international law, and Iran will persist regardless of how talks unfold. The US insists otherwise. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff calls any enrichment a red line, raising fears of potential weaponization and threatening to derail ongoing nuclear talks. It's not just Iraq. Deputy Minister has also warned that if Washington would not budge, the negotiations are in fact doomed. Yet both sides still plan to meet in Rome for a critical 5th round. The IAEA confirms Iran's enriched uranium stockpile is in fact growing. Tehran says it's for peace, but with trust hardening and being at an all-time low, remains to be seen whether diplomacy is running out of time. Just a few weeks after it was hit by a major power blackout, Spain has now been struck by a nationwide phone network outage. As per reports, emergency services in a number of regions had to be provided as new telephone numbers had to be given for those in need after phone lines collapsed following network upgrades by Telefonica. Spanish media reports suggest that landline telephones were the worst affected, but all voice services by Telefonica appear to have been affected to some extent. The blackouts a few weeks ago had brought chaos and heavy financial damage to the country. And the voice of Saturday night football is falling silent as Gary Lineker, the face of football on British television for a quarter of a century, is walking away from BBC. His final match of the day airing this Sunday. The decision follows a storm of controversy after he reposted a video critical of Zionism, sparking accusations of anti-Semitism. Despite a swift apology, the damage was done. Sources say the former England striker accepted his position had become untenable. The BBC, already under fire for its handling of impartiality, accepted his resignation in what insiders call a heartbreaking end to a legendary broadcasting career. At 64, he exits with dignity, refusing to let the BBC become further engulfed in controversy, but not retreating from activism. Those close to him say he will now speak freely, no longer bound by impartiality rules. One of football's most familiar voices, silenced not by age, but by outrage. Well, as we wrap things up, we're going to end this show with a very interesting update that's coming in, and a development which has actually left scientists scratching their heads after some strange footage from a remote island in Panama. Cameras meant to study clever capuchin monkeys and their tools caught something more bizarre. Well, monkey kidnappings between 2022 and 2023. So you have two sets of monkeys kidnapping each other's babies. Why? Well, scientists have no answers to that. Some monkey business that science cannot answer. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of India Global. Thanks so much for watching.